In this lecture, we are going to examine the www.root folder associated in our ASP.NET Core scaffolded web application. We are also going to examine the scaffolded MVC controllers and views in our ASP.NET Core application. So if I go to the startup.cs file, you will see inside of there a parameter of app, and it's associated with the library of Microsoft.ASP.NET.Builder.iApplication Builder, and this defines a class that provides the mechanisms to configure application's request pipeline. And inside of that pipeline, I associate the app parameter, and I use static files. And use static files allows and enables static file serving for a current request path. So inside of that, without this method being called inside of the configure method, you would not be able to serve up static files from your www.root folder. This is necessary to serve up static files such as CSS, our images, our JavaScript, our libraries that are associated with our Bower compilation and package management. This is a necessary method that has to be called within the configure method to associate our static files in the www.root folder. I've created another method right here that enables default file mapping on the current path. If you want a default file to be associated with the first request to your application, you can put use default files, and this will look in the www.root folder. And inside of that, if you have an index.html, it will look for that as its default file. You can also enable different route handling to associate a primary file. But in this case, if I go to the www.root folder, and if I didn't have MVC installed, it would go to this file. So let's go to add new item. Let's go to client side. Let's create an HTML page. And then this HTML page, if I was not associating the routing or anything like that with MVC, it would look for this file right here as my primary page and render it and allow it to be rendered from the www.root folder. So this is necessary to implement static files, and it's also necessary if you don't want to utilize MVC. You can go ahead and put this as a default file to associate inside of your ASP.NET Core application without having to utilize MVC. Now that we've looked at how to render static files associated in our ASP.NET Core application and looked at how to render static files in our www.root folder, let's look at the default layout for MVC in our application. One thing you'll notice that we do not have a default models folder. That doesn't come scaffolded off the bat in an ASP.NET Core application, but we have built-in controllers associated with a default controller, home controller. And this renders the iAction result of index, about, contact. And then if you go to our views folder, you'll see right here that we have a home folder that's associated with our home controller. In future lectures, we will look at MVC and see how the routing works in MVC, but I just want to show you how this works in a basic scaffolded web application. So we have our home controller here, and then we also have a home folder that associates the naming convention to each one of our methods on that controller. So index page, about page, contact is associated with our CSHTML pages. So if we go to index.cshtml, this is what's rendered in that page. And then as you've noticed, all of these pages also have essentially a master page, a layout page. So if we look at our viewStart.cshtml, it's saying the layout goes to the layout page. So this viewStart is going to be associated with this layout page, which is the layout for all pages that render default views. So you can associate your view with a layout page, whether you have it as a view start or not. You can associate this in a specific page to give this as its default layout. Now, one thing to look at here is this is a layout page. We've talked about it briefly. We can develop our layout page for two different states, for development and also for production. So as you can see, this is built-in tagging to ASP.NET Core. And you can see this is environment, and this is with Microsoft ASP.NET MVC tag helpers. And you can read the definition that these tag helper implementation targets different environment elements conditional based on the current value of hosting. So if you're hosting in development, that's one item. If you're hosting in staging or production, it renders different static files. So right here in development, we're going to the lib folder in our www.root folder, and we're looking for the bootstrap associated with that. And it's taken us there to the distill, CSS, bootstrap, And then also for our site.css, it's rendering that from our CSS file. So in development, we're going to these places. But when we're actually in production, it's going to a CDN, render Bootstrap, and also a minified fallback version. If this doesn't work at the CDN, it's going to the fallback version that we have in our lib folder. And you can see all of this being rendered in 2 different environments. This is what's nice about the new MVC tag helpers in our ASP.NET Core application. You can target 2 different environments, whether it's development or production, and then you also create fallbacks for these different properties. We will go in further detail in future lectures on these different tags. So we're going through that, and now we also have the same at the bottom of this page. You can see the environment name of development here for our different scripts associated in our application. For development, we have the library folder. We're going to the local files associated in our lib folder in our www.root folder. In production, we're going to a CDN, which is a remote web server that's hosting that script, but we're putting a fallback in case this script is not working at the CDN. We can always fall back on our static file in our project structure. So we have all these different scaffolded items in our ASP.NET Core application. When we start building our app, we're going to start building all of this from scratch. So we have a good understanding of how to set this up. Building an app from the ground up helps you retain the understanding of all the different elements in your application. So in future lectures, we will delve into building all of these different elements from the client and server side in an ASP.NET Core application. We'll go ahead and build all these items from scratch in subsequent lectures. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture. Have a nice day.